Hi, I'm Peter Rao.
And I'm Mike Doran.
Welcome back to Counterbalance.
Peter, today we have my good friend and co-host of the Israel Update podcast, Gadi Taub from Israel. This is like, I feel like this is a Ghostbusters thing. I have two podcasts, and we're crossing the streams today.
Which one of us is the mistress and which one is the wife?
It depends on the day. Anyway, Gadi.
I'm beginning to feel like the bar mitzvah kid, you guys talking over my head.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Gadi, welcome, Gadi.
Toda, shalom, hello.
Gadi, you're a professor at the Hebrew University, which is the Harvard of Israel.
Don't insult my university, please.
And you are a very prominent. He's a very prominent right-wing intellectual, and you haven't really experienced Israel fully until you walk down the streets of Tel Aviv with Gadi Taub, because people come up to him and they say, "Gadi, I'm with you," because Tel Aviv is very liberal.
So the dominant culture,
very liberal,
much like in American cities.
They say, "Gadi, my husband likes you."
That's an exaggeration.
But don't tell my employer.
No, sometimes I get shouted
at. It's not an exaggeration.
I
had this experience.
Yeah, but I don't think it was whispered, and sometimes I get it shouted from my cab drivers. And because the right in Israel, as elsewhere, is constantly humiliated by the left. I
can't believe you just came. You just came on my podcast and told my audience that I don't tell them the truth.
Do you want to start over?
No, we'll just continue.
But I'm saying
I'll just sit here in the dark.
What I'm saying is that the right has traditionally been humiliated by the left for being stupid, uneducated, and it doesn't count that the right was continuously proven right.
Yeah.
But we all grew up with this, that the right is comprised of ignorant bigots. And then if someone like me moved from the left to the right, or as someone said in Haaretz, Gadi Taub was once an intellectual, now he's on the right. So part of the job of right-wing public intellectuals, I think, is to prop up the self-respect of the right. Because the right in Israel is moderate, sensible, commonsensical, conservative. It was right about the Arab-Israeli conflict for all this time. It was right about economic policy, and yet it is humiliated constantly. And the left, no matter how many times they're wrong, they're still arrogant.
Yeah.
Well, Gadi, let's start with the most obvious question of all. When Mike was in Israel and appeared live on Israel Update, you two in the flesh next to each other, he came back and told us about why he traveled to Israel. You're here in the flesh. What brought you to the U.S., and what have you picked up in your trip so far?
Well, it was, first of all, I honestly felt I needed a relief, a little bit of respite from what is happening in Israel. I was going to go abroad for a conference in Budapest on the morning of October 7, and I got to the check-in counter and decided that to turn back. We didn't know yet exactly what was happening. It was 11 in the morning, but the information was seeping in, and I got calls from friends, and I turned around and went back. And so that's the psychological thing. But other than that, I was invited to a synagogue in Texas, and then also to Hudson. And I thought it's important to speak about what's going on in Israel. It's important to speak to American Jews because I think there is now a ray of hope to explain to non-fanatic liberal Jews that this administration is working against Israel's vital interest, and they should stop being duped by the Biden administration's warm words, because what they're doing is putting our lives in danger, the existence of the state in danger. And so perhaps there is a lever within the Democratic constituency to either convince some to not vote for this administration, or else apply pressure on it from within that would counter the pressure that comes from the Squad and its allies and the whole, progressive contingent. So this is something Mike explained to me. He said, I wasn't aware of how ignorant the American public was, or how deceived the American public was about the administration's Iran policy. And I think that now Israel and American Jews should start voicing their concern against this appeasement policy.
So, what kind of interaction are you having with the Jewish groups you're meeting with? Are they receptive to what you have to say, or are they hostile?
Well, it depends. I also met with more conservative Jews who there are such people in Texas, because Texas, as you know, is a red state. But the liberal Jews, the way I went about it is analytically. And as you know, Mike, this is not my characteristic mode of polemics. And so instead of attacking, I took a step back into a professor's I'd say demeanor. And what I try to explain is that there is a war of interpretations. And one narrative is trying to, the narrative that is doing harm to Israel is trying to frame this conflict as one more chapter in the ongoing story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and localize it. And the other interpretation, which I think is true, because as you know, I'm not a postmodernist, I think interpretations can be compared against facts, and or we can see how they fit the facts. The other interpretation, which I think is true, is that this administration is deliberately framing the conflict in this way because it does not want you to see that what is really going on is that the war in Gaza is just one arena of the larger appeasement of Iran policy, about which I first read from in an article by you and Tony Badran called The Realignment. So once you have this key to understand what is going on, and you give it to people and you support it with facts, you create at least the beginning of a dissonance. It's very hard to convince people of opinions if they hold one, to just take them to the other end. But if you drive a wedge there and show the facts in a way that is not, the minute there were the lectures and there I was, and then there were the more intimate meetings, and I'd say that the more intimate meetings didn't go as well, because I shared the behind the scenes of my presentation, and then I met, and this was extremely depressing, I met with people whose hatred for the right is like the Bibi derangement.
The right in
syndrome.
Israel or the right in America?
The right in America, the hatred of Trump. And, someone huffed and puffed at me at a buffet after he said, Trump said that the Nazis are very fine people. And I said, how many times should this be fact-checked and disproved before you stop peddling this lie? And he turned, you could see his jaw tighten. He said, you don't know what you're talking about. And these people are not convinciable. And what struck me, these are intelligent people,
So just to, they're not, their hostility to Trump means that it translates into a desire for Biden to be more pro-Israel than he is, because they don't want to give to Trump any kind of recognition for having an alternative policy.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So they're imagining Biden.
So they imagine Biden as something better than what he is.
Yeah, and the Israeli left helps that, because the Israeli left is selling to the American administration the Israel that he wants to imagine. So while Jews want to believe that Biden is pro-Israel, there's a counterpart to that. A counterbalance? No, it's a counterpart. It's the same. There's a part in Israel that supports this narrative by portraying a pro-peace, pro-two-state solution constituency that doesn't exist in Israel. And so if the narrative goes that the American administration has just stepped in to help save Israel from itself, because the
From
right,
Ben
from the
Gvir
right,
and Smotrich.
and Netanyahu here is just behind Netanyahu. It's if you just remove Netanyahu, then the peace-seeking Israel would re-emerge, and that is a pie in the sky. Israel has moved drastically to the right, and you won't find any support for the two-state solution.
When I read U.S.-Israeli relations and the history of it, there are moments like the Suez Crisis in 1956, which Mike wrote about in Ike's Gamble, his book, buy it on Amazon.com, where...
That was translated to Hebrew.
Was it?
Yeah.
Just his book? I don't get any adjectives between
book.
his and book?
Yeah.
His spectacular book, his enlightening book.
His enlightening book.
Thank you.
Where squabbles border on disagreements, border on outright crises in the relationship between Jerusalem and Washington, the Yom Kippur War, where Mike wrote also a spectacular essay, I think, for Mosaic just a few months ago.
Path-breaking, don't you think?
Path-breaking, yeah. Path-breaking essay. Also had moments of real sharp disagreement that lingered. When we record the 2000th episode of Counterbalance 15 years from now, and we look back on this war, the war in Gaza, where on that spectrum, maybe to both of you, do you think squabble, disagreement, outright crisis? Is it a speed bump? Are we careening off a cliff? Will we say that this conflict ranks? And not to put too fine a point on it, but I'm struck when reading the mainstream press accounts of what's happening because of the disagreements between the government in the U.S. and the government in Israel, or Israeli society, as you point out, are out in the open. That the real concern is that we're going to lose the Arab American community for the president and his reelection. John Feiner, the deputy national security advisor, went to Michigan and bent the knee and apologized for American conduct. There's constant discussion about fears of losing the Arab world, but there's very little discussion about the potential wreckage of U.S.-Israeli ties. Can you talk about that a bit? Maybe Mike as well.
I'm deeply concerned because if this administration continues after the next election, then I was convinced by Mike that they are sincere about their belief that they can reach accommodation with Iran, and that would be at the expense of Israel's existential interests. So this, first of all, this is shaping up as the worst crisis in American-Israeli relationships so far, and since America is in very deep trouble itself, and since pro-Israel sentiment and American patriotism have gone so well together, as America is sinking in a cold civil war, Israel can be one of the victims of that war.
What do you think, Mike?
I think I agree with that, and I think the Biden administration is going to recognize the Palestinian state by early summer. You mentioned John Feiner going to Michigan and bending the knee. And then President Biden just said 2 days ago that the Israeli response in Gaza has been over the top, and that he's
speaking of path-breaking press conferences, I think that would qualify as one. But
and he's at his wit's end with Netanyahu. I can't remember
good pun, Mike.
How he put that. So there's clearly a desire to appease the progressive left on Gaza. At the same time, the administration does want for the Israelis to win against Hamas, but they also want to defeat the Israeli right at the same time. And they're going to do that with the recognition of the Palestinian state. And so Biden is going to appeal to the progressives with this historic achievement of recognizing a Palestinian state, and he'll campaign on that. It's going to be a major part of his campaign, and it will he'll have to get it in place by the summer so they can squeeze all of the electoral advantage that he sees in it. I don't know that there really is, but that's their calculation. He wants to squeeze it all out before November.
And Gadi, how would that play out amongst Israeli politics and society? If Biden, on the one hand, is perceived to be, at least in pure military terms, supportive of Israel or wanting Israel to defeat Hamas, but on the other hand, recognizing a Palestinian state, would this destroy the right, or would it actually empower it?
Oh, it will empower it. It will empower it considerably, because all the alternatives are intimate with this administration, have tried to sell us the awful maritime border deal vis-a-vis Lebanon, have argued that intimacy with the Biden administration will help change their Iran policy once we explain to them clearly enough how dangerous it is, as if they don't know what they're doing. So anyone who is connected with the Biden administration it gets anywhere near the idea of a two-state solution will be labeled a pariah in Israeli politics. Note that now the Biden administration is drawing optimism from the fact that Netanyahu has sunk in the polls considerably. The polls are misleading, and I think he's recuperating. But their picture is that he is sinking in the polls, and Benny Gantz is rising. And Benny Gantz, they know, is a traditional supporter of the two-state solution. So the way they look at it is, the balance is changing. People see the opportunity. This is not at all the picture, because Benny Gantz has been avoiding any question about a Palestinian
He's
state.
not going to like that move in the summer.
Like the plague, the plague.
Let me just, sorry to interrupt, but let me just, for everybody, just in case some people aren't familiar with who Benny Gantz is. Benny Gantz is a former IDF chief of staff, so he's a general, but he's a head of a major opposition party who joined the coalition, the National Unity Government after October 7th. So he is a rival of Netanyahu, but he is now a minister in the government during the war. He benefits. What Gadi is saying is that he benefits personally from the fact that he was not in office; he was in opposition on October 7th. So October 7th has tarnished the reputation of everyone who was actually in power on October 7th. Gantz wasn't in power, and Gantz has been very good in terms of his public expressions.
Ambiguity, as Kissinger called it.
He being ambiguous in his statements about what he wants, but also making sure to put the emphasis in all of his statements on national unity in time of war. So the popular feeling that we need to unify right now, it coalesces behind Gantz, and that's
really
important.
But it's also a banality of sorts.
But I must
temporary
mention
too, because as Gadi's saying, the public opinion moved to the right in general, but the immediate beneficiary of the desire for unity is Gantz. So it's kind of a paradox.
But Gantz is also constantly inciting against Netanyahu. So Gantz's usual line is we should preserve our unity, and Benjamin Netanyahu should stop inciting against the left. So Benjamin Netanyahu is the most mamlachti. Help me with that term.
Statist, I guess.
No, not exactly. He's the most
establishmentarian. There's no word in it.
Yeah, but it's a combination of a responsible adult and small R Republican, and so Netanyahu is the last person that is really inciting against anyone. But the minute he says anything critical about anyone, it's called incitement, and they can incite against Netanyahu as much as they want. So Gantz is playing both sides of the issue. The minute he chooses them, the balloon will explode, and he will and he may fall steeply in the polls.
But by panicking and rushing towards recognition, isn't it encouraging the Palestinians to sort of set out maximalist terms themselves, and it's encouraging Netanyahu to come out with categorical statements as well, I would imagine. I mean, this is maybe something that allows Biden to solve his domestic political conundrum heading into November, but it's strategically obtuse, is it not? As a layman following Israel, that's my theory of the case. But
I have, but Gadi should answer this.
I don't know. I think all these. I think that the fact that Israel has moved to the right so decisively is going to be the determinant fact, and that the idea that there is a moderate, peace-seeking, two-statist constituency was ridiculous before October 7. It is preposterous after October 7th. I don't think it has any chance at all. So anyone riding that bandwagon is going to crash against the will of the majority that hasn't even begun to coalesce. Because if you look at what's going on in the cabinet, and the reason that Netanyahu is again recuperating or regaining some of his popularity is because Netanyahu was the one. Every press conference, he said, we are going to pursue this war to the end. We're going to crush them. We haven't changed our course. And he walked a middle line all the time because there was American pressure. Everyone felt it. So he would say, America is a great friend and ally. We have our differences, but we iron them out. And he kept returning to that refrain until in his last visit to the region, Blinken said, don't invade Rafah. And Netanyahu said, we are going to invade Rafah because it's necessary for winning the war. But he has support, Blinken, has support among the IDF brass. And in his last visit, I think this is becoming Israelis. There were anti-Kissinger demonstrations back in 73-4, and I think we're going to see that against Blinken because Blinken last time asked to talk to the
I saw that
the IDF chief of staff, and Israelis said,
one-on-one.
Yeah, how? This is they think we're a vassal state and they can just run the IDF for us because the Democratic Party has its fingers deep in the military establishment in Israel through think tanks. All the generals then become fellows through the Pentagon itself, but also through American financing of think tanks and the people of October 6 are now employed by American finance think tanks to try and persuade us that we should go for a two-state solution. So the ideas that failed on October 7th are now rehashed with American help, and this doesn't go well with the Israeli public.
The interesting thing about I'm going back to Peter's question about is this strategically obtuse? I think it is a strategy. It's important to recognize it is a strategy and it's a coherent strategy. But the goal, if you think that the goal is to weaken Iran, then it's obtuse. But the goal is not to weaken Iran. The goal is to defeat Hamas in Gaza and to defeat the Israeli right simultaneously. And if the United States recognizes it, will, I think the Biden administration will recognize the Palestinian state. I think they're moving on that. I'll be very surprised if they don't, because
that for Israelis, we have just now gotten decisive proof that Palestinian recalcitrants, am I pronouncing that word right? Palestinian recalcitrants was not a coincidence. It's not because we didn't have good enough offers. It's because their national goal is to destroy Israel. And we just now saw fanatical, murderous, sadistic jihad. And after that, you think Israelis will agree to have a Hamastan placed over Tel Aviv on the mountain ridge of Judea and Samaria, overlooking the beach where Israel is 9 miles wide and has all its main assets, strategic, military, economic, demographic, in this strip. And now, so if you think that leftists are going to agree to live 5 minutes from Qalqilia and have the Palestinian police, which is an army by now, 10 minutes away after they praise and see as role models the terrorists of October 7, then you're making a miscalculation.
You're forgetting that it's going to be a revitalized.
It will be revitalized.
Reformed too, I think.
Yeah, reformed and revitalized, and they were going to do it in like 4 months.
Yeah, but the more vital they are, the more worried they are. That's the
more worried you are.
Yeah, but it's amazing to us that the Biden administration thinks that it can insert a word And it will, Mike, do they actually think that they will find a Palestinian partner for peace, or is this just a move against Netanyahu?
No, they've got it.
They've got a revitalized Palestinian
They
Authority?
have no. They have. There's something in this for everyone. There's the obviously this is a huge benefit to the Palestinian Authority because they're not going to. They can't. They're going to package it simultaneously as recognition of a Palestinian state and as a pathway to a two-state solution. So the United States will recognize the Palestinian state, but it won't decide where the borders are. That should be done in negotiations with the Israelis. So basically, what they're going to do is they're going to take the reality as it exists right now, and put a new name on it, which is instead of Palestinian Authority, it's Palestinian State, and that will reward Abu Mazen and his cohort significantly because they will now have the status internationally of a state, and they'll have a position in the half the world will, more than half the world will come and recognize them, and they'll have a position in the United Nations, and they'll have a position within international institutions to attack you, and they will have if Biden is reelected, they'll have the United States Treasury designating Israelis all across the West Bank.
And this is why I think that what Israel should do to preempt that is begin to embarrass the Biden administration domestically and internationally. I think there is no more anything to gain by papering over this friction.
Well, you have to win the war, and there's still a dependence on the United States.
Of course, but remember that there is also a limit to an administration in an election year can pressure Israel without beginning to lose steam here.
It's like Ukraine, though, where just a quick parenthetical, where Zelensky's put between a choice: more weapons or a NATO invitation. And if that choice is actually put to him, he's always going to choose the weapons because he needs the weapons essentially to survive. I mean, that's a bit crude and reductionist, but that is in a way what I think is looming over his head. And I don't, as long as Israel has to run these operations, I don't see it.
Can you unpack that? Sorry, Gadi. Can you unpack that the choice that Zelensky has?
Well, just to put it very quickly, without getting off on a digression, the Ukrainians badly want an invitation to NATO, and whatever form it takes,
to join NATO.
Invitation to membership. Well, ideally, they'd like to join tomorrow.
They'd like a pathway to membership.
They'd like a pathway to a pathway to membership, exactly, in NATO. And leading up to the Vilnius summit, which was the last NATO summit, there was a big public dispute when Zelensky, frustrated by the state of the communique negotiations, went public with his disagreement with the Biden administration, basically scuttling the goodwill that the Biden team was trying to show at Vilnius. And this was last summer. This is supposed to be a Biden administration triumph. You've lost in Afghanistan. You're struggling elsewhere in the world, but at least you have NATO solidarity around Ukraine. And so leading into this summit, which will be this summer in Washington, the 75th anniversary of NATO, an important, they'll want to make it a celebration of sorts, even though it shouldn't be that, which again, I'll leave for another time. I think we should be more present and forward-looking. The White House would like to lock down communique language much earlier, which I think is delusional because it will be negotiated up to the final moment. But they want to avoid all of the embarrassment that took place last time. At the same time, parallel to this, there's this debate about weapons going to the Ukrainians. And I think while we don't know whether or not the congressional package will pass, but if it does, there's a lot of discretion there for the administration on what type of systems and how to supply the Ukrainians. And so if the Americans are putting pressure on the hawkish Europeans and on the Ukrainians regarding don't upend the ship around the NATO summit and invitation, and at the same time deciding over the pace and scope of weapons deliveries to the Ukrainians, there's leverage there for sure. Right. And I don't know if
There's
Israel is the
another-
right parallel, but that's what popped into my mind when I thought about it.
there's another thing that the Americans have lots of ways of putting pressure on the Israelis, and another one is to not support Israel in the United Nations.
Yeah, that's
But
a
this is
very
all
big
setting
leverage.
up to my opening question. I mean, this strikes me as far worse than 56 or
Yeah.
73 or any other crisis. And we're not discussing this at all. The entire public debate is about, is MBS going to be okay? Is the Biden team going to lose Arab voters? Meanwhile, our major strategic aircraft carrier, this unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Eastern Mediterranean,
It's being downgraded,
being
in
downgraded
front of
into-
our eyes. Yeah,
in front
it's
of our
being,
very eyes.
it's being turned into a tugboat.
Yeah. Sorry, Gadi, I cut you off.
No. I just wanted to say that Israel has been in conflict with the United States and with the international community in far more dire situations. So while this is probably the worst conflict with America, we fought the War of Independence under a weapons embargo, which America participated in. And then there was the aftermath of the Suez when Ben-Gurion had to withstand pressure from both superpowers at the time, and I think that Israelis now are bracing themselves for things far worse than a Gaza conflict, and I think that though our leadership is not yet ready for anything like that, the Israeli public understands fully that this is a war of survival, and that we are going to have to make great sacrifices, and that I can't say that I know what the actual alternatives in technical terms of where to get the weapons and their quantities are. But there's, on the one hand, there's the spirit of sacrifice, and on the other hand, we have examples of our statesmen that understood that being in alliance with someone far stronger than yourself does not mean that you are a vassal state, and that a small ally can also threaten to cause great difficulties for a superpower. So just to give an example, the American fear is that Israel would drag it into a war. That is not a possibility completely outside the realm of reason. It can happen, and a desperate Israel can also be dangerous. So there's a limit to how much and where we can be pushed when we understand the danger is existential.
And you lose, as the United States, strategic input on helping shape Israeli thinking if you're not prepared to back Israel. And to your point, a desperate Israel pushed into the corner will behave as it sees fit without taking counsel from Washington, which is not exactly, I think, the position we want to be in. But since I think you alluded to something I want to ask about, let me connect our conversation to date to what I'd like to ask next. If the U.S. does, as Mike suggests, and recognizes a Palestinian state, that is, almost under any reading, an enormous propaganda victory for Tehran. They're the ones that have instigated this escalation dynamic, and they've essentially pushed the U.S. and forced it into taking a decision which everyone will connect with the Iranian pressure campaign. I had lunch this week with a very senior European.
Will that be so? Will the American public connect it with the Iranian pressure?
No, I am
You
thinking
mean
more
the
of
Middle Easterners.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking more of the region. But I had lunch this week with a very senior European who is no longer in government, but now is running a major organization in Europe. And he, over lunch, was saying to me, if I was the Biden administration, I would just put so much pressure on Netanyahu now, because if he stops this war, then everything goes away. The Houthi rocketing of ships in the Red Sea, the Hezbollah emptying out northern Israel through its rocket attacks. Point of fact, aren't we? I mean, I would take the opposite view, feeding a monster to where the situation grows even more dangerous and more tense, because the Iranians are empowered. They can see that if they only press enough, the U.S. will back down. Which way will it more likely tilt? Will it more be that we get a brief, I suppose, respite and eventually it escalates, or can we get a permanent stability out of this? I think everyone knows where this is going, but I think it's worth asking because we haven't discussed Lebanon yet in the north.
I don't know that I have a good answer. The ability to play brinkmanship in Israel is the ability of statesmen to play brinkmanship depends on the extent of desperation. And since the Biden administration is increasingly pushing us to places where we think we are in existential danger, the greater the motivation would be for statesmen to play desperate cards. How that turns out, I don't know. But once you think that someone is pushing you to the brink of extinction, you will take a 70-30% gamble if you think that your chances are much less if you acquiesce to what the Biden administration is doing. And if we lose this war, it will be clear to us that our blood remained in the water for the larger sharks to smell, because Hamas is the smallest of our enemies. So without supposing that the war is limited to the south, I think we have a longer breathing space, because we can maintain the war in low intensity and begin manufacturing our own ammunition in the long run. So if it stays there, we maybe have more leverage. For the way it looks now, Hezbollah does not have an appetite to go to a full-scale war. If they go to a full-scale war, I don't think they have the offensive capability of destroying Israel. They have a capability to cause us great pain and huge losses, but they cannot destroy Israel, and Israel can cause immense damage to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So it's not that, although the situation is extremely critical, I don't think we've pulled all the tools that we have at our disposal, because we're not in total war for now.
There is a kind of law of unintended consequences that I think will come into play once they move toward recognizing a Palestinian state, because all the things that Gadi said, all the sharks in the region will smell blood. And that actually makes a war between Israel and Hezbollah more likely rather than less. I don't know at what point, because Israel is going to realize that all of the enemies of Israel are going to see that the United States is actually helping them advance their position, and Israel is going to realize that it has to deter its enemies, and it has to do it alone, because the United States won't help them. So I don't know at what point the Americans start to realize that when they push over here, they get a reaction over here that they weren't expecting. They may also get reactions on the West Bank that they don't expect, because the Israelis, if this thing is going to be a state, if there's going to be a state in the West Bank, as Gadi says, 9 miles from the Mediterranean, that is going to be prosecuting the conflict with Israel through international institutions and with the aid of allies, then it's going to then the tensions between that state and Israel are going to escalate very quickly, and the Israelis are going to start looking at, what do we have to do to secure our border with this enemy state next
and
door.
Mike, Israel can very simply just step in and dismantle the Palestinian Authority. It can do that theoretically.
That's what I'm heading toward. I don't know how aggressively they're gonna push it, but they're gonna move in that direction, because it's intolerable that Abu Mazen gets all of these rewards without actually making peace. It's not when we in the Bush administration thought of the two-state solution, we thought, let's take care of the final let's get the final status questions. I never believed we were gonna get the final status questions ironed out, but among those people in the Bush administrations who did believe that a two-state solution was possible and maybe even imminent, there was a sequencing. You take care of the final status questions first. If you leave all those hanging and you elevate the Palestinian Authority to a state, you're making all of those questions more difficult rather than less difficult.
Not to mention the closest thing to a state the Palestinians have is Gaza.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, and isn't a state entitled to possess a military, a police force, all the rest? I mean, how's this going to work? I don't understand any of this.
No, it's not. You have to understand. It's 90%. It's 90% a domestic. It's two things. I'd say 75% a domestic political strategy with the progressives. It's 25% the acting out of a fantasy that the Democratic Party has had for a long time.
I don't think you have enough percentage left for the desire to topple Netanyahu.
Oh, that's the fantasy part.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, you're probably right. It's probably like 50-50, actually. 50-50 the electoral strategy, but 50-50 the fantasy of they want to. This is, remember UN Resolution 2334, which I think that's the one, the number.
Yeah, the last
Obama's kick to the Israelis as he was leaving office, followed by a speech by John Kerry about the Kerry parameters. What's called the Kerry parameters. He had his vision of what a two-state solution would look like. The Trump administration was an interlude. They are going back to 2334.
Fair enough.
And also, Peter, if I might interject, I think that this is also an attempt. The Abraham Accords were an anti-Iranian coalition, which was backed by the United States, right? And it came about because they bypassed the Palestinian veto. Bringing back the Palestinians to the middle of the stage is like throwing a bowling ball at the Sunni-Israeli coalition against Iran to dissolve it. So it also has strategic meaning within the region in realigning the coalitions, the alliances.
Well, and I don't know if it means realignment in the domestic political sense as well, but I have friends who are dyed-in-the-wool Democratic Party liberals. They're not progressive necessarily.
I told
liberals.
you, Gadi, you can't trust Peter.
Yeah. And
very suspicious circles.
And at the same time, they are very pro-Israel. They are proud Jews, and they're going to be put before a very tough choice because they're going to have, on the one hand, their absolute connection to Israel, which matters so much to them, and yet their belief in the Democratic Party. At the same time, that Trump is potentially the alternative. That's going to be hard for them.
Biden is snowing them, and he's snowing the Israelis, and he's doing it by means of normalization with Saudi Arabia. So in this package of the recognizing a Palestinian state, there's something for Saudi Arabia, which is a defense agreement with the United States, a defense alliance, and the Saudis are so the Abraham Accords, as understood by Trump, was the nucleus of an anti-Iran coalition. The Biden administration came in, was totally against the Abraham Accords and wouldn't even say the words. And then they got ridiculed for that. And they look silly in the eyes of people like your friends who say, isn't making peace between Arabs and Israelis a good thing? So now they found a way to put make Abraham Accords, instead of it being the nucleus of an anti-Iran coalition, now it's the vehicle for resurrecting.
It's the midwife of a Palestinian state.
The midwife of the Palestinian state, but it still gets read. Normalization with Saudi Arabia gets read in pro-Israel circles as coalition against Iran. In the context of the Biden administration, it is not that. But that's how it gets read.
And this is what they did from day one, because their attitude toward the Abraham Accords was, let's bring in the Palestinians on these accords, and that means dismantling them or dissolving them. And
even Prime Minister Netanyahu is in favor of the normalization with Saudi Arabia. I mean, he sees that as part of his legacy, I gather. So he was pushing that. I don't know where he is on it now, He was pushing that. All of the a big chunk of all the anti-Netanyahu people in Nahum Barnea, Ben Caspit, and so on, they're saying Biden wants a coalition against Iran. The price is we have to accept the two-state solution. Let's do that, and then we'll work with Biden against Iran and Saudi Arabia.
But is that enough? I mean, is that sugar enough for Israel to swallow the bitter medicine that the Biden team is trying to feed them, or are we going to hear howls of protest, which will shape those friends I'm describing that are liberals and at the same time pro-Israel? They will hear normalization from the Biden team, but if there are howls of protest coming from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, that will make them think twice. I mean, which is it going to be? Are they going to pacify Israel with this or no?
No, all this will be in the shadow of recognizing a Palestinian state. It's such an anti-Israeli move that all the rest of it is going to be looked at as sideshows, in my opinion.
Interesting. Well, it's going to be an interesting year, huh?
Yeah.
We can at least, can we agree on that?
Yeah, I learned that there is actually no Chinese saying that we wish you an interesting year as a form of swearing.
Oh, I like that. I love those things when
but the Chinese don't say it. But it's a nice thing. The people who wish you an interesting year, I'll say it this way: we are not bored in the Middle East without adding any new interests.
How do you say thumb drive in Hebrew?
Diskon key.
Diskon key. Do you know why? So no one in the world except Israelis call a thumb drive a disk-on key. So why do the Israelis use an English phrase for that no English speaker uses?
My initial guess was that Israelis invented it, and they invented it with an English term in order to sell it.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly
that's
right.
right.
And so the English phrase continues to be the Israeli phrase, but no English person uses it.
Wow. Gadi's showing off the intellectual and the public intellectual there. Good guess. I think
I was showing off the startup nation.
I love that. I love that though. I love when countries adopt foreign words for things that the foreigners don't use.
Right.
Do you know the term "at the best shall at the best"?
No.
It's the best, but it's the best of the best. It's with the English "they," and then you add the Hebrew version of "the." So it's "had the best shall had the best."
All right. For more of this banter, Israel Update is the podcast Mike and Gadi have. But thanks for coming on Counterbalance, and I've really enjoyed this and learned a lot.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.